Good evening, everyone. I call to order the October 3rd, 2022 business meeting of the Cincinnati Board of Education. We welcome everyone and request that if you are in the audience, you silence your cell phone and any electronic devices. Ms. Wagner, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Bolton?
Present.
Mr. Craig?
Here.
Ms. Jones? Here. Dr. Moffitt? Mr. Morosky?
Here.
Mrs. Weinberg? Here. President Lindsay?
Here. Members of the public who wish to and are online may do so by clicking the chat button now. The chat feature will be open for your requests for 5 minutes. Please submit your name, your affiliation, your school community, your topic, and your contact information if you would like a direct response to any questions that you might have. We're going to get started this evening with our superintendent's update.
Thank you, Board President. So we have a couple of updates for today. One of them is our 100-day plan final report. If we'll do the PowerPoint, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so as you know, I started in this role on May the 2nd, so we're coming up on about 160 days at this point. And this is just a compilation of what we were able to find and review as a part of that 100-day work. And we're just going to kind of scroll down. So we start, if we'll go to the first one. So first I want to just thank the board and to thank the community for the overall engagement and what that engagement work has looked like. This is a PowerPoint version of the same information that I shared with you. I shared it with you in the report form and in the PowerPoint form as well. So we know that the 100-day plan was broken into 4 phases. So in the first phase, the phase was to engage, and that engagement work really looked like a compilation of sessions going out to schools, interacting with the community, having conversations across the board, primary questions that were asked, and at some point all of you were involved with engagement sessions with me. But the primary questions that were asked is, what excites you about our district? What one thing is working really well? And if you were me, what would you do first? During those actions taken during that time, we met with all principals, interacted throughout the community, did a SWOT analysis of each department, met with all of our board members as well. And we started with the draft, which we're still working through that draft of the superintendent's evaluation. We also had our board retreat. So that was kind of in the entryway of where we started. I think really important, the lessons learned, of course, as you already know, but this was really valuable for me to be able to learn during this time and confirm during this time that we have a diverse community of stakeholders who want the very best for our students. That our ideals collectively are aligned as we think about what we want for our children of Cincinnati. And that resonated through the sessions and working through those sessions. We did really also find that we want to make sure that we're paying attention to culture and to how we're creating a positive culture throughout the organization. Right now, we walked away with there were some fragments, and we're really looking to bring those pieces together. And that we want to make sure that we are continuing to look at how we're using technology across all platforms to do things such as review information, review data, share information, so forth and so on. And then we go to the explore phase. And in Explore, several actions were taken here, and this is right around the time that we were working with principals as they were preparing for the transition to for the summer, but we were able to unveil our collective focus on the ABCs, academics, behavior, and culture, and that's something that's really become a part of our foundation for where we're working for this year as the board is working through our goals and guardrails and what ultimately we will give back to the community based on the community's input. But in the interim, really focusing on what's happening in the classroom, the time that students are in classes, what instruction is happening, how are we thinking about behavior, both academic behavior and psychological behavior, socially emotional behavior, and culture, a culture of learning, a culture of recognition, a culture of support. We have a diverse community. We've learned this, but we have a diverse community who is really willing to roll up their sleeves and help us. If they know what it is that we're asking them to do, they're willing to support us. And we're also implementing processes that support and then our third phase, of course, is the evaluation phase. And throughout the evaluation phase, this was really a time to begin to look at our organizational structure. How could we better align our organizational structure to be responsive to the needs of the organization? We were able to also do an intensive review of our curricular materials, all of our resources that we're using in our classrooms, and the expectation for what those things look like. We finalized our new website and the new design, but really to make it more user-friendly for our community. And we also partnered with Metro to make sure that we had our high school students were able to get back and forth to school on time, and that was really important during that time. There is a lot of historical information, and this is a lesson learned that are within our teams. And so being able to make sure that we're calling on the historical information, that we spend more time committing our protocols and procedures to print, because there is a lot of information that when you've been doing it just for such a long time, it's just the way of doing business. But if it's not committed to print, then it does make it a bit of a challenge when you have another person that needs to pick up the gauntlet and move forward. And continue to align the budget so schools in the greatest need receive additional resources. So we've really worked in partnership with our treasurer. We're working through our equity indicators so that as we begin to go through this budget cycle this year, we're really doing that with more of a strategic alignment to what are the needs of the schools and how are we looking at that in an equitable way. And our phase 4 is equip. And in the equip phase, we really spent some time doing even more engagement, aligning with our SROs. That was a really popular conversation during that time, and how we're going to work through that process. We did have our safety town hall meeting where we had our professionals that partnered with us so that we could share where we were collectively. The district-wide welcome back address happened during that time as well as professional development. And we did also start our excellent walks with facilities. And I think the positive part about that and getting feedback from schools is that we're continuing to see those things show up. And so that's something that's really important. Lessons learned. Our community is strong. We show up in large numbers to support each other. That across the district, the emphasis continues to be on dedicated systems and holding ourselves accountable to nothing less than excellence. And that our SROs are not just law enforcement. They are choosing to be a part of our school community and mentors and caring adults. So charting our course forward. Where do we go next, and what do we do as we think about where we go next? And it's continuing to look at the strategies that are going to be necessary as we begin to talk about grades in just a moment, but the strategies that are going to be necessary to get to improved outcomes for students. We've done a lot of work. We've done a lot of great work. But ultimately, how do we make sure that our students are they're having the benefit of improved outcomes, that their academic achievement is greater than it was when we started this journey together. So thinking about just those 3 areas again, continuing to, and this was just more discussion, but continuing to leverage our strong curriculum materials to ensure that they are implemented during instruction and that instruction is consistent in every classroom. So it goes back, and I date myself a bit when I say this, but we think about years ago, we talked a lot about bell-to-bell instruction, what's happening from the start of the class to the end of the class. And it's during that time that instruction and relationships are really built with students. And continuing to create a professional learning community where teachers and leaders feel prepared to meet the diverse needs of the students that we serve. In the area of behavior, making sure that all of our environments are both physical and psychologically safe, and that students know when they show up, there are caring adults that will be there with them to help them through whatever it is that they're facing. and that we continue to develop our positive outcomes, the areas that drive positive outcomes through our character-based lessons, through PBIS, and restorative practices as well. And in culture, creating a culture of learning, respect, celebration, and support throughout the building, throughout the district. So not just in the Ed Center, but in every one of our schools. And improve student and adult outcomes related to social emotional learning, family engagement, and school climate. And so this was just an overview of just what we learned through the 100 days. I will stop here and see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Superintendent Wright. Do board members have any questions on the report out from the 100-day plan? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the next item.
Awesome. So the next item is one that's also really near and dear to me because it's the baseline information that we have for where we are right now with our school report card. And this was released a few weeks ago. We've done several comments and different commentaries about it, but wanted to put it in a way that would allow for additional questions or conversation if they existed. So the first, these are each of the indicators that we are rated on as a school district. We know that we went from the last report card, which was in 2018. Last report card had an A to F system, and since then the state has gone to a 5-star system instead of A to F. There is not an overall star right now for the state. There is just the stars in the individual areas. And so as we look at the areas, we see that in all of the areas that are rated, achievement, progress, gap closing, and early literacy, our school district rated at 2 stars. And in graduation rate, we rated at 1 star. The college and career readiness workforce indicator is not rated this year. It should be rated next year. So that's why you don't see stars there for that one. So as we think about the weighting, this breaks down for you how much overall, how much of the weighting goes into the components for the report card. And so if there is an area, for example, where that area does not exist, then that particular percentage is divided between all of the remaining categories. So for example, if you're in a K-6 school where you don't have graduation rate, that 14.2% is then divided between the other areas. The same thing for early literacy. If you're in a high school where you don't have early literacy, then that 14.2% is divided between the other areas. So just to go in, just to address just a little bit more what this means for the district in terms of the stars. So 13% of our schools received 3 stars or more. This is consistent with previous performance over the past 4 years. In terms of achievement, schools to celebrate, we've listed those schools out. 5 schools improved in terms of their achievement level, and that means proficiency. That's a percentage of students that showed on grade level based on the Ohio State test. We did have 5 schools that improved overall, and then we had the schools that went from a C grade to 4 stars, and then from a B grade to 5 stars. I think the one thing that we find as we look at this data, and we'll talk about this more during the state of the schools, but we do see that when we look at this data in terms of achievement, none of those school environments are our neighborhood schools. So when we look at the schools that have met the achievement expectation, the schools that have met that are selective schools. Achievement schools needing focus, 31 of our schools received 1 star, 18 elementary schools, 10 high schools, and three terms that we're calling combo schools because that gives us our pre-K-12 or K-12 experiences within those schools. And then 20 of our schools received 2 stars, 17 elementary, 2 high schools, and then 1 of the combo schools. Then we get to the area of progress. We had a lot more improvement in the area of progress. Prior to COVID, progress was an F for the district in 17-18 and in 18-19. 70% of our schools receive 3 stars or more. It doesn't include CDA and Lighthouse, just so that you have that as a reference point. Progress schools to celebrate, 8 schools improved from an F or a D to 4 or 5 stars, and we have those schools listed. When we talk about progress is talking about growth. So it's based on the assessment, the students or the percentage of students in the school, in the tested areas that had growth. And so 70% of our schools were able to show improvement. Schools needing focus, 11 schools received one star in the area of progress, 6 elementary, 4 high schools, and 1 of our combo schools, and 11 schools received 2 stars, 6 elementary, 1 high school, and 1 of the combo schools as well. And now we go to gap closing. And so gap closing essentially talks about the amount that we're able to close the gap from where students are performing to where they should be performing. And 64% of our schools received 3 stars in this particular area. Prior to COVID, gap closing did increase as well from an F to a C. So that says historically we've done better in the area of gap closing. Where we're going to need to do additional focus is in our area of progress, even though we had 70%, is the area of progress as well as the area of achievement. And schools to celebrate, 10 schools improved from an F or a D to a 3 or 4 star and across the board in terms of gap closing. And our gap closing schools needing focus, there are 6 schools that receive 1 star, 1 elementary, 4 high schools, and 1 combo, and 18 schools receive 2 stars, 10 elementary schools, 6 high schools, and 2 of our combo schools as well. This indicator is on early literacy, and early literacy across the board. We believe in looking at the data, and I think it's for obvious reasons as we think about what our students need. This is one of the areas that had a strong hit for us as a district. 49% of our schools received 3 stars or more in early literacy, and prior to COVID, early literacy for the district in 17-18 and 18-19 was a C. So 6 schools improved at least 1 step above 3 stars. The schools are listed, and then our schools needing focus in terms of the numbers, 16 received 1 star, 14 elementary and 2 combos, and 8 received 2 stars, and that was 8 elementary in the area of early literacy. And our last indicator for today is graduation rate. And we talked about recently in graduation rate, in order for us to get 2 stars, graduation rate has to be at least 85%. And therefore, we know that there is more work for us to do in that space. 27% of our schools received 3 stars or more in graduation rate. Overall, the district, we know that we're at 78.1%. Graduation rate, and it's of note, during COVID, there was flexibility with graduation rate. So many of the indicators as we think about participation and where students were, because of the flexibility of COVID, we're not comparing the same kind of information as we're talking about graduation rate. 4 schools improved at least 1 step or earned above a 3 star. We have 4 stars and 5 stars in terms of graduation rate, which means that those schools have met the necessary indicators. 8 schools received 1 star, 6 high schools and 2 of the combos, and 3 received 2 stars. 3 high schools, and we should have taken off no combos, but none of the combos received 2 stars. So overall, areas requiring our greatest focus and overall investment as we think about how we move forward and how we really strengthen the support that we're providing for students is strengthening our Tier 1 instruction. And that essentially means what students are doing in class every day, the alignment that there is to overall standards level expectations, building capacity around the instructional shifts that are necessary to get our students to a level of mastery, pedagogy, and student engagement. So not just what we're teaching, but how we're teaching, what we're teaching, and how we're doing the engagement across the board with our students. More intentional focus on literacy and math, starting with K-3 literacy and 7-12 math as we look at those particular areas. From the data that we reviewed as a part of our goals and guardrails, we were really able to see where in the what we would think of at one point as that middle school space, the kind of decline that we were able to see specifically across math. And a real intentional focus on high school achievement and graduation through each of the assessments, as well as our career readiness and graduation seals and planning, where we're starting that conversation prior to ninth grade. We know that the graduation cohorts don't start until the students get into ninth grade, but we can't wait until they get to ninth grade to start those conversations. And areas where we feel that we can have some of the quickest results to increase student benchmark assessment participation. So as a district, we do benchmark assessments. We use for math, we use iReady, and we use MAP for all of the other areas. For math up through sixth grade, we use iReady. Through fifth grade, I'm sorry, we use iReady, and then we do MAP for the other areas. What we found is looking at the data, we, for the first benchmark, which happens in the fall, the percentage of students that participate in that are greater, especially in the high school area, than the percentage of students that participated in the spring prior to assessment or in the winter prior to assessment. Why is that important? Because as you're looking at the data, it gives you some time to course correct or to correct some areas where students may be in deficit prior to them actually taking the assessment at the end of the year. Increase student exposure to OST and EOC sample questions. There's a lot of information that's available on the website, on the Ohio website about the assessment. And having done this work previously, one of the things that happens is we recognize that it's important for students to see the work on the actual test that they're also seeing daily. So making sure that there is an increase in their class of exposure to the kinds of questions that they'll see on the assessment. And then continuing to do reading support while we have staff that's helping with reading, additional reading support through tutors. We're saying our Be Present tutors because that's our initiative, but continuing to work collectively with those that are working with our students around their skill deficits. So we do the assessment, it gives us information in terms of those deficits, but then what do we do with that information so that it's actionable? Increase staff understanding of the assessments by utilizing available release ODE resources, practice items, item specifications, problem limits. And I will share that, again, having done this work in other places, the information that ODE provides around the assessment is really strong information. The limits of the test, the item specifications for that, how it's drilled down, and even the practice opportunities. So us as a district beginning to use more of that. And these are just the links overall. The links to all of this information comes from the Ohio website. If we go to that website, we can click on the link and see all of our schools, all of the grades, all of the stars. During the state of the schools, I'll also share a document that shows where we were and where we are for each of the schools so that we can also see, because that's one of the questions that we have for individual schools.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Do board members have questions about the report card presentation? Mr. Morawski?
Thank you, President Lindy. I do have a question, and it's always a sad presentation for me because I think everybody, at least here, knows how I feel about this report card. And I have to quote my colleague Eve Bolton in saying, this does a really good job of measuring wealth and not achievement. There was one school that actually wasn't a magnet that was in the high achieving, but it pulls from the 3 neighborhoods in the city that have poverty under 10%. The only 3 neighborhoods in the city that have poverty under 10%. That being said, it is the measure we have, and my colleagues remind me of that, at least some of them, and the superintendent is working within that. And I want to say a couple things and then one question for really the public's edification, I think, more than anything. I am happy to see some of the improvements, honestly, and especially during the tumultuous time we've had the past 2 years to see any improvement is the story. It's a story that's not often told, which also makes me sad. Additionally, and it's certainly not to cast blame, but it does beg to be repeated every time we have this presentation that Ohio was 5th in the country for education until the Republican Party took over the state of Ohio and drilled us down to 31. It's real. There are forces that work against us. And I say all of this not to make a grand political statement, but to show that we are making improvement amidst all of this and amidst poverty in our city that nobody seems to want to do anything about. So sorry to be a downer, but that's what we're working with, and it makes it really difficult, and we're doing a good job. And one last thing I want to say kudos. While the presentation makes me sad and I hate it, I am really, this is the most specific information I think I've ever seen. And I think I said this about transportation at the audit committee, so I appreciate it. Because you have things that you now know what you can do. You talk about ODE, I don't have as much beef with them, but you say they got some really good, they're like, hey, here's the path, let's tap into that. We know where we have to get, so I think that's great. One thing I do want to call out though, and again, I don't want to give Ms. Bolton too much credit, but she also has brought this to my attention, and I think it would be good for folks to know. So the graduation rate, I think people see that, and they have a lot of opinions about it. Like, oh, you should be able to get 85%. But the way they measure graduation, how do they measure graduation?
Yeah, so graduation rate starts with the ninth grade cohort. So it starts with the year that the child enters the ninth grade. And it doesn't matter where they are when they enter the ninth grade. Mm-hmm. If they're graduating from an Ohio school, it starts with when they entered ninth grade. The thing that's very interesting about the area in graduation rate is you also have to be able to keep up where kids are once they leave Ohio. So if they move in the state, then eventually they show up in the state's data in a location, even if we didn't get records or records requests. If they move out of the state, we cannot remove them from the denominator. As we think of numerator and denominator, so our denominator is the total number of students in the cohort. We cannot remove them from that cohort until we can prove where they were. And so it's really important in this space that we are using every possible opportunity to locate students. The other thing that's also important is we cannot withdraw students from our cohort. So, for example, as a ninth grader, if that child doesn't show up, we have to carry them until we determine where they show up. So eventually they're going to come back around to our cohort. So there is a lot of work in this area, but there are also a lot of strategies that go along with this that will also allow us to meet it. One more thing I will add here as well in terms of cohort, our students that are on special standards count against our graduation rate. Mm-hmm. And that's federally, mm-hmm. and that's the 4-year rate and the 5-year rate. So it's not something that Ohio created. We didn't create it as a board and a CEO team. It is, if a child graduates with a special diploma, even though they spent their time, they do not count as an actual graduate.
I appreciate that. And then just real quick, President Lindy, I'll be finished. So just 2 things I just kind of want to highlight for folks, because I think this is really important. So if a student leaves our district and goes to another state, we're screwed. And they stay in our denominator unless we can track them down, which you say we're starting to put the ability to do that. So I just want to highlight a couple of things. We live 12 miles from Indiana and a stone's throw from Kentucky with a transient, impoverished population in a city and a county with a housing crisis. My point is, I'm not defending 78%, but there is some real serious context in these numbers that need to be talked about. The second piece is then our superintendent and her team are now devising ways so they can run around and locate students instead of doing the important business of educating the students we have, which is a time suck and a brain drain. And this is because of very deliberate moves by a state legislature that we work with and we try to work with and do our best. But this is something that needs to be told, and it's a story about this district that's very real. And that's why I hate this presentation, but I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Other board members have questions or comments? Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes. I'll be quick. Thank you, Superintendent Wright, for discussing the report card. I just have a couple of questions because individuals come up to me in the community regarding what is the plan for the 51 schools that are rated at a 1 or 2 to show improvement or to show progress I know that you mentioned that you're going to have your State of Schools address, which I'm pretty sure you're going to talk a little bit more about that, but I didn't know if you could comment on that for the public, for
Yeah, so
public knowledge.
I can. If we'll go back to that slide, the slide that showed next steps, Rob, if we can go back there for just a minute. I think that this is only the beginning. There is a lot more that has to happen in this space that starting May 2nd does not necessarily give me as much time as needed to have the kind of impact in this space that I know ultimately we will be able to have. So it's one of the reasons, knowing what I know about instruction and the importance of the standards, that you hear me talk so much about Tier 1 instruction. What is happening in core instruction? Our district, prior to me, did a great job of identifying curriculum that was aligned to standards. And so when I'm talking about standards, I am talking about aligned to what students should see on the end of the year assessment. They did a great job doing that. However, there has to be additional work there to build capacity for our teachers and additional support for our teachers so that they are also able to work with children, many of which are not already at grade level, right? They're able to work with them to help them access that Tier 1 instruction at a grade level space. That's one thing. The second is, as we talk here about an intentional focus around literacy and math, it really begins to look at where are our student skills deficits. So some would argue that because the students are not on grade level to start with, then we can only teach them at a certain level because they're not able to access the other information. My rebut to that would be, and it's no different than when I was a math teacher and math department chair, every math teacher that I knew wanted to always teach fractions because for whatever reason, the kids didn't get fractions, right? And my rebut to them was, I had students that were able to do advanced math, kids that I taught calculus, Calc 1, 2, and 3, they had a challenge with fractions. So I'm going to give them strategies to help them engage with the fractions, but I'm not going to keep them away from the higher level learning that needs to happen. It's the same thing with us. And so at a tier level, at tier 1 level in the classroom, it's making sure that we are giving our students grade level standards, and we then meet their skills level deficits in small groups and small group instruction, and using the technological resources that we also have that allow us to expand the time that students need on task.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Weinberg. Other board member comments? Ms. Bolden?
Yes, thank you for the report. Appreciate it. And I hate it too. But you did a heck of a job with it. A couple things. Mr. Morosky, wow, stole my thunder about the idiocy of the graduation rate. And it's a clear piece of evidence, if I were in court, to prove that there are aspects of this report card that are racist, and they are classist, and they are done to belittle and diminish and disrespect the work that communities that have great mobility and great poverty are doing. So enough said on that. I was very impressed with Hayes Porter. The numbers were really good there, looking at all those. I do think, too, our high schools have far greater roadblocks brought to us by ODE and also the state legislature. So as much work as we do in our high schools, it's almost impossible for at least half of our high schools, perhaps more than half, to do the kinds of things that need to be done. You can focus on parts or fragments or portions and you'll have some success, but overall it's just very, very difficult for our high schools, and that's why I'm still very proud that they are, for the most part, comprehensive high schools and still indeed are accredited high schools, and you couldn't tell that by what the state politicians have made them look like. This report card, I'm really glad to have it because we've kind of missed not having it these last couple of years, because they do give us direction And more importantly, they do give us an opportunity to compare and contrast our schools. And I think that's the cool thing. And I know the board has always tried to avoid kind of that smaller, that site base when possible, but I think we get a new start on doing that now, because the board can't just focus on the macro district results. We're going to, with you, your leadership, we're going to have to be focusing on, as we used to some years ago, it's kind of the school by school piece. So I think that's great. I am glad that they got rid of the grading, because that was just so easy for the community to misinterpret about failing schools instead of poorly rated schools. And once they knew who was doing the rating, they kind of got the message. So I think that's useful. I do think too, as we look at this, it's important to look, and I've mentioned this to the treasurer, and we've talked about it in finance. The report card has voluminous information and quite specific, even down to the school site, the financial aspects that will also guide us in our budget efforts, both the macro at the district and also school by school by school. It's pretty fascinating. There's so many other things I want to say about this, and I would hope that we'll be able to do that in another meeting when we're talking business, so to speak. But I do think it would be useful for us, and people have heard me say this before, we are not a district that has magnets and neighborhoods. We are a district that has a number of school systems within it. We have a preschool system. We have a K-8, PK-8 system. We have a 712 system. We have a Montessori system. We have a system of schools that are, I would say, international. So it'd be interesting based on this, which I don't want to base my life on or our children's lives on, but to use this data to start to see where we're having the most success. Which types of our schools are having the most? Do the K-12 schools do better versus other schools in another category? Or indeed, our Montessori piece, very frankly, where we have the greatest diversity, seems to be holding its own and seems to be having among the best success. And it also speaks finally too, and I hope this is not interpreted incorrectly, it does talk about us needing to grow our diversity and welcome back as much of the middle class as we can, because that helps each site. It's because this is an economic measure as much as it is well, not as much, but clearly close to it. And then finally, I will say, we can also thank Cincinnati Public Schools as part of the urban network. We at least were very vocal and very involved with getting rid of the grading system. And indeed, through the urban network, we got to this point, and the urban network, as bad as this is, it is far better than it was before. And I'm happy to use it and be able to do what the board needs to do to help you with your leadership. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bolden. Any last comments? Vice President Jones.
Yes, I'll be brief in my comments, and I wholeheartedly agree with everything that's been said, including the fact that it's a little gut-wrenching to hear it, but it's accurate, and I appreciate it's accurate to the degree that we can classify accuracy, given all the circumstances. I do want to say first that, and this maybe should have gone in kudos, but I want to thank Ms. Bolton for being a part of that urban network. Her name floats around up there as being one of the harshest critics about the grading system. And so whenever I'm at those state meetings and they say, well, we have Ms. Bolton from CPS, I go, yay, Ms. Bolton. So Ms. Bolton had a huge part in making sure that that system was changed. Also, I think, and you all know kind of where I stand about this whole conversation that we're having about the boundaries, but I do think that a lot of implications from this report feed right into that conversation about boundaries. And I think what I hear more so, and the superintendent in the last meeting not the meeting before the last one, where you identified those areas where you wanted to do your audit. This is a perfect sort of picture of where we are and where we need to go. And so I hope that we can do justice to that as we look at our systems of schools and the way they're structured and how we might move forward with that.
Thank you, Vice President Jones. Any other board members who have not gone who would like to? I'll just share swiftly. I'm glad Mr. Morosky is back so he can hear me disagree with him. But we've had this conversation before, and I think multiple things can be true at once. I think you can't miss the relationship between wealth and outcomes on the report card. I think that's absolutely true. The other thing I deeply believe, there are two things, is that we are here to break the relationship between wealth and academic opportunity. And I believe deeply that all of us can, and that our kids can do it too. And my conviction that relationship is breakable comes not just from my experience being a teacher in the classroom, but from our own schools. If we go back a couple of years and look at Evanston Academy here in Cincinnati, Evanston went from a 51% pass rate in reading to an 85% pass rate in reading with a 99% economically disadvantaged student body. We've talked a lot about graduation rates tonight. If you go back a few years and look at Euler went from a 38% graduation rate to a 92% graduation rate. That's with a 99% economically disadvantaged student body. And I say none of this to pretend that is easy. I think that is a function of the incredibly hard work of the students, families, and teachers and principals in those buildings. I just want to register an alternate perspective that I think the message to take from the report cards for me is we have a lot of work to do to break that relationship, which is something that I think I deeply believe is something that is possible, and I'm excited for us to do that together. Mr. Morosky, even though he already went.
I appreciate that, President Lindy. And yes, before Mr. Lindy was on the board, we used to have this conversation in private and coffee shops. Now we're having it publicly. For the record, and I know President Lindy knows this, I would never suggest that our students cannot achieve. My issue is the metrics used to judge them unfairly puts them in categories. And it is tied to real decisions that are made by real adults that are elected by real voters who don't care, not only don't care about our kids, but don't actually even like them. And that makes all of this way harder. It makes our superintendent, us, forget us, teachers, people doing the hard work, have to do things that are a complete waste of time, that aren't actually measuring outcomes. Those tests that you reference, you're right. First of all, the reason Euler went that high is because they changed their structure to keep their kids in that school to 12th grade. No, it wasn't easy, but it wasn't some really grueling thing. They pimped the system, and that's how you get better scores. I don't have any faith in a system that encourages gaming a system. I don't for 1 second think our kids can't do it. I have an issue with what our state legislators say our kids are capable of, and using metrics that change, potentially for the better this go around, but that change to continue to make Black children not be able to move forward in this country. And that's not, me being cynical, and I don't think you have any Pollyanna, because I follow you. I'm into it. I want to do it with you too. But I just want to state for the record, I don't think our kids cannot do it, but I do take serious issue with adults that hate our children and design tests to make them feel worse.
I appreciate that, Mr. Morosky. Thank you. So with that, I think we will transition to the next item on our agenda this evening, which is a recap of our board priorities. And we'll try to do this as swiftly as we can. But folks who have been watching our meetings will hopefully remember that starting this year, this is the third time we've done this, but our board has looked several months ahead and declared in advance, here are the priorities that are our most important work over these next few months. And here's where we hope we can be by the end of that time period. And we're trying very hard to hold ourselves accountable to spend the majority of our time on those topics that we decided in advance are most important. So what we're going to do tonight, as quickly as we can, is just go through each of these and provide a very quick update on how we're doing. What I have asked, emailed board members to see if people would suggest a color for each of these 5. Green meaning done, yellow meaning we're on our way there, maybe we're not quite done yet, or we're slightly behind, red meaning meaningfully behind. And so I think on the first, we're going to hear from Mr. Morosky. Would you say a color and just a sentence or two about why?
Sure. On governance, I would say, when I thought about it, I would say we're probably at a yellow A, because I think we're doing it. We're in the midst of it. We've done everything we said we would up to this point, but we're not finished. So, I think it's going well.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky.
Yeah.
What we're going to do is hear from each of the people suggesting a color. And then at the end, we will take we may just be at consensus, but if we're not, take a quick vote on those suggested colors. So Mr. Morosky suggested yellow for number 1. I think Ms. Bolton's going to suggest a color for number 2.
Yes, for the strategic plan that hasn't started yet, I'm going to give it a green.
That's bold. Can you explain why?
Light green. No, the major reason, very frankly, it's not done because it hasn't started yet. You threw me back on that one about green means done. I would give it a green because of all the previous work we have done in preparation to get ready for the strategic plan. And that's not just our previous strategic plan, but a lot of the governance work we've done, a lot of the budget process changes we've made. We've got the right policies in place. And really, I could really make it a green if we decide as a board to initiate the strategic plan before the end of this calendar year, and certainly have it done by the time that a strategic plan could influence our next budget and our next 5-year forecast. And I think we can do that because of the previous work. So that's why I'm putting in my color as green.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton.
Dr. Davis has green on. So that's
Multiple reasons. Okay, so on 3, I think we're going to hear from our superintendent.
So in thinking about transportation, we're about half and half. When we think some of the concerns that we had, really our greatest concern, I think in one of the meetings I shared that my greater concern was the yellow buses, but the percentage of students with greater than 1 transfer, we have not identified any students that have more than 1 transfer. And so that's on Metro. Even the on-time Metro, that wasn't one of the indicators, but the percentage of students with transfers, we have not identified any of those. Percentage of riders who arrive on time for school, we are vacillating between about 75 and 80%. We started the school year at 35%, and each day we're really around between 75 and 80% on average. If we look at an overall metrics, as we think about, the Council of Great City Schools metrics for on-time arrival is one of the indicators that most organizations use, and that generally is between 95 and 98%. So collectively, and that, as I understand, is where the district has been previously. So while we see growth in this area, we're not where we are looking to be in terms of on time. The challenge is it is very much out of our control, because it comes back to the need for additional buses and the need for additional drivers. And now it's more the need for drivers than it is just the buses, because our contractors have been able to get additional buses. Now it's trying to get drivers for those buses.
This sounds like yellow.
It's a half and half. So if that means yellow, I don't know what yellow and orange make together. I don't know. Yellow, maybe. Yellow.
Let's stick with yellow to just keep.
Yellow.
We have 3 options: yellow or green or red.
Yeah, okay, then yellow.
And then we're going to hear, I think, from Vice President Jones on number 4.
Thank you, and thank you for giving me the one that's the most straightforward. It will be easy. I think, as we all know, we have a renewal levy on the ballot on early November, and it is moving well. It's well on its course, And we're feeling very good about it. Our external committee is working hard to secure the endorsements that we need and the level of support from the community. And I believe that at this point in time, we are at a yellow.
And agreed, thank you. And we can all celebrate when we hope that goes green
That's
on
right.
the 8th of November, counting no chickens before they're hatched. And then I think we're going to hear from perhaps Mr. Craig on the 5th one.
Yes. So I've been sitting next to Eve way too long, so I'm going to give it an alternate color. And say orange, because I think we are between red and yellow on strengthening our community relationships. We actually have, as a board, part of our governance strategy is put together a list of the various different community partners and members and groups and organizations that we are all starting the process to reach out to for our goals and guardrails conversations as well. We have our levy conversations that are going on. So there is a lot of conversations that are in the process of being started. They just haven't quite started yet. So if they had started, I would have given them a yellow. But because we're not quite there yet, I'm going to go with an orange.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. I'm trying to balance multiple things at once here because I do think it's really important that we hold ourselves accountable to the things we said we were going to do for the public. I'm not sure, though, if people agree with everything up here or not, and I certainly want to create a minute if anybody has any dissent on any of the substance for why people shared the colors that they did. I'll share from my perspective, this feels pretty accurate, but I want to invite disagreement if anybody sees anything differently. Okay, and if not, then I look forward to providing another update to the public on the 8th or shortly thereafter, and hopefully we'll be able to report back that everything is green. Ms. Bolton.
Just, and this might save us some time towards the end of the meeting. I agree with the superintendent on the color, but on the transportation piece, again, I feel deja vu or whatever it's from last year with the inability of us to get whatever those swipe cards are, RTI or what have you. RFI. Because once again, we went all last year without being able to know what the unique ridership with Metro actually was. And it looks like based upon what they've told you, we're going to go at least a semester this year. And I would bet you $5, which is a big bet for me, $5, then at the end of the first semester, we're going to hear we're not going to have the cards either. And we must have the unique ridership for Metro because I believe we have somehow this expense and our on-time piece has to somehow be able to be measured with those cards. And it'd be hard for us to, move into the next sort of budget preparation without that. And the other piece, I really appreciate you putting in not just the yellow bus, but the vans and then also the other vehicles that we use for our medically fragile kids. I think it would be great to break that down to more of the specifics because for the public's benefit, we have children that arrive by ambulance to our schools. And the vans and also the kids that are experiencing homelessness, those things that we're required by federal law to provide. If at the next time, and I didn't want to make that an assignment, and I think this might preclude having to discuss this on board matters. I think that would be very helpful for us to know that our kids are getting and families are getting serviced with the best that we can do.
Thanks, Ms. Bolton. Superintendent?
Thank you. We do have that information. The information that we review, we break it down by our students that are receiving special ed services for our schools as well as our non-pubs. So that's something that we can share.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I believe now we are at any other comments before we go on? Okay, so we are now at the item on our agenda for hearing of the public. Each speaker will have 2 minutes and will direct all comments to the presiding officer. Before I go further, I did not receive any paper slips for tonight. Do we have anybody in person?
To the chair, we have no one to speak this evening.
No one in person or online?
That's correct.
We're going to move beyond the hearing of the public section, and we're going to go next to our minutes. So I need a motion to accept the minutes from special meeting September 12th, business meeting September 12th, business meeting September 19th, special meeting September 19th, please.
So moved.
Second.
I heard Mr. Craig, I think, or no, Mr. Moraski on the motion. Is there a second? I think we heard from Vice President Jones. Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. We'll move next to our committee reports. We're going to hear first a report from the Records Commission Committee meeting on September 12th. Is there someone who was present at that meeting who would like to present a brief report on that meeting? I was, and I can present that report very swiftly. Ms. Wagner, would you be willing to do that? Thanks.
I'd be happy to. So this is an annual requirement for the district to review their records retention policies and readopt or act on the retention schedule as needed. And so we did meet for this requirement. And the committee is the treasurer, the superintendent, and the board president. We readopted the schedule.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wagner. Do board members have any questions about the Record Commission Committee meeting? Ms. Bolden.
Yes, very quickly, and thank you all for serving on it, and it is required by law. I just had a question about the action to the superintendent referred to the retention of lesson plans and recommended the need for a procedure that could include administrative guidelines. Maybe if the superintendent can embellish on that. I know it's not an academic freedom question, but it is the work product kind of question. Or if you could kind of talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Sure. To the level of our discussion, when we looked at the kind of records there were and the amount of time that they needed to be retained, we recognized that there is not, kind of going back to what's in writing and what's not, there doesn't appear to be, there at one point there was, but there doesn't appear to be a written process for keeping lesson plans for the amount of time that they need to be kept. So, and also recognizing that a lot of the lesson plans now are also online. And so having a way to codify what those plans are.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the Records Commission? Okay, we'll keep moving to the Ad Hoc Boundaries Committee, and we're going to hear from Committee Chair, Board Member Moffitt.
Thank you so much. I'm going to, the committee minutes are online, so I won't read them line item. I'm just going to talk about the action items that we talked about. Committee member Bolton requested a listing of programs for individual schools to be provided to increase the market share and feeder capacity, and we talked about that. Some of that information could be included in the audit that the administration is doing, and we'll be presenting to that committee. I asked for a prediction of how many preschool and kindergarten students are in our district, as we could potentially use this to predict the population of students that are coming for preschool, kindergarten, third grade, et cetera. Committee member Jones suggested that we have more Montessori schools, and so we definitely are an advocate for that. And another action item is that the committee will come prepared with recommended revisions for their first draft of the work plan. So we're going to get our work plan finalized. We did talk about some action items and tasks for the remainder of the year, but we will come work together to finalize that for the rest of the year, for the remainder of 2022, but we're going to come with the suggestions for the remainder of the academic year. We've got a nice agenda for our October meeting, which will have to be moved from October the 25th. I can't make that meeting, but we'll let you all know when that date is going to be, but we're going to have for our agenda on that day, for the October meeting, an update on 1 mile walking distance of elementary schools. We're going to discuss a list of what schools are or are not magnet schools and how those schools are designated. One thing that came up during the meeting is that we have some schools that are not listed as magnet schools any longer. For example, our Paideia, and they are enrolling as if they were magnet schools. And so we want a list of what are true magnet schools by their designation and their enrollment, and then schools that are not listed as magnet schools, but that would actually are enrolling that way. So those are some of the things that we will be talking about. Please go to the website for the complete full set of minutes, and I submit them as written.
Thank you, Chair Moffitt. Do we have any questions for the Ad Hoc Boundaries Committee? Ms. Bolden.
Just to emphasis what the chair has said regarding enrollment pieces, probably would be helpful to make sure the committee knows when the enrollments begin or when the processes begin, because we don't want to lose yet another year because we decided something, well, actually 2 years ago, and it didn't get implemented. So it'd be great to kind of have that date as to when all the processes start regarding enrollment in magnets, because the rules are different. But one thing I was taught a couple of years ago was that on the Paideia schools, kids were given particular priority if they were coming from an elementary Paideia. And so that priority impacted other people. But my understanding, we have, for all intents and purposes, under the previous administration, eliminated the Paideia because it was not necessarily generally happening in each of the schools. So it would be great to know those dates so that we don't miss another year by a week or two or month or whatever, and the bureaucracy has moved already. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Board Member Moffitt. Any other questions for the Ad Hoc Boundaries Committee? I had one, which was just kidding, Mr. Morosky.
Brief comment. Thank you, President Lindy. First of all, I love reading these minutes. It does seem like it's substantive. Things are happening in a good use of time, so I think that's great. I did want to highlight that the prescient comment from Board Member Jones about the more Montessori programs. I'm not a Montessorian. I didn't go to Montessori. I think I probably would have liked it, knowing what I know.
Get there.
Really? Take a picture.
But going back to the sad presentation from earlier, all of the schools that leapt forward were Montessori, and a lot of those, if not all, I can't say that was true because I don't have the numbers. They're pretty diverse schools. So I think that was a notable comment. Is my point. Before we even saw like the list was the Montessoris, and then to see that in the minutes, and in honor of Miss Bates, who if she was sitting here would have talked for another 10 minutes about but I won't, Ben.
I'm sure she's watching, Mr. Morosky.
7 years ago, she knew we needed a third Montessori high school.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Do we have any other questions for the Ad Hoc Boundaries Committee? I'll ask my one here. I think I wanted to make sure I was reading this right. As far as the proposed final work plan, am I right in reading that that's in progress and will be coming at a future date? Right. Thank you very much. We're going to go now to our Health and Safety Committee report from Chair Weinberg.
The Health and Safety Committee met on Monday, September the 19th, 2022 at 3 p.m. The attendees, of course, were myself, the chairperson, and Dr. Moffitt as the committee member. The administration or staff that was present was Dr. Davis, and our CPS government liaisons were also in place. We started the meeting off with Mr. Kearney, who is the CEO of Kearney & Kearney. He provided the committee with a September 2022 report of all the bills that are pending in the Ohio House, the Senate, the primary and secondary education committees, and the State House. He also stated that the committees have not met since the end of May, and they are resuming here shortly. There were some action items that are listed within my minutes that I will read about, but first I will talk. Our government liaison shared with us about a program grant, which will be awarded to 99 schools. It's going to allow our students to be able to offset the cost of travel for a field trip to the Supreme Court, and the tours are available at no cost. So the action item that was requested was by committee member Moffitt in suggesting to the administration that we definitely apply for this transportation grant for our kids to be taken to the Ohio State House as a field trip. Moving on, there was a question about House Bill 722, the Parent Bill of Rights, and Mr. Kearney reported that there was no information available currently on this bill. and that he would keep an eye on it and keep us updated. We then moved on to a presentation by Dr. Davis in which we talked about physical health, the dental and vision, and it was discussed about the 13 school-based health centers that support 14 schools. We also have 5 community partners that serve students at these sites. That includes Cincinnati Health Department, Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center, Crossroads, Mercy, and WinMed. There was an action item given from Dr. Davis that she reported that the quarterly reports are generated that contain the percentage of students using the health centers, and the report would be available in October. There was an action item coming from Committee Member Moffitt, which she wanted to know if the administration can do a presentation where we were given those data and the particular numbers in which the demographics of who is exactly using the centers, how many people are being served from the community that are not attached to the school, and where they're getting the service and how beneficial the centers are to the community. We then moved on to talk in other business about just safety of our staff on and off school grounds. And we also discussed safety of our students at school in terms of a protocol for when students are injured. Dr. Davis did bring up an action item of following up about a parking garage incident that occurred at one of our schools. We then moved to items that were brought up by Dr. Moffitt in regards to safety and the concerns of our student safety and our staff safety in terms of creating a log to track the safety concerns of staff and students. And in the end, Dr. Davis reported that there is a general log that exists about those concerns in which we get calls into the superintendent's office, and there is a log on transportation as well. There were no speakers for hearing of the public, and the meeting was adjourned, and I submit these minutes as written.
Thank you very much, Chair Weinberg. Do we have any questions for the Health and Safety Committee regarding their report? Ms. Bolton.
Just one, and so glad to see the report from Dr. Davis and all the work that you all are doing. I would suggest the only group I know that is more data influenced than perhaps our superintendent are our partners at Growing Well. And Growing Well has all those sorts of data that I think Member Moffitt has asked for. I mean, everything, whether it's a percent of consent forms and who's received this service, that service, and what have you. So to reach out, probably should, as a member of the Growing Well group, it probably would be great for the health and safety members that are interested to maybe attend. And I know you haven't been invited yet because it's a new year. But I think you'd be very impressed with that group, and they've been keeping all kinds of stuff, as well as the superintendent I know has a standing invitation for the Growing Well, and they've just had a change in administration and leadership, but the data is fantastic, and it is school by school and very useful.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Other comments or questions, Mr. Craig?
Yeah, I just wanted to a little something more of a comment with regards to the questions that were asked about safety on school grounds and off school grounds. I know the current climate that we've been seeing, and especially around the city lately, that a lot of incidents that have happened near and around schools. And so it's important that we are making sure that everybody out there knows as well that we're paying attention to that. We're paying attention and we're not letting it sit around, being proactive. And so I appreciate you all bringing it up in the meeting. I appreciate the administration already having processes in place, track that information, and already being ahead of the game and thinking about it, because I don't want us to ever let the folks out there who are sending their kids to our schools, who are trusting us to take care of their kids, not to think this is at the top of our importance. So just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Other comments or questions for the Health and Safety Committee? Okay, hearing none, we're going to hear from our final committee report from Ms. Bolton for the Budget, Finance, and Growth Committee.
Thank you. We had a carryover and an update regarding a request, I think, that was brought to our attention by Dr. Moffitt, and that was the website and the processes regarding doing business with CPS. The treasurer presented that update. We also had, again, thanked Member Craig, thanked the audit committee about their endorsement for our levy. And one of the more important things I think we did, and I think every committee has to do it, I know policy has worked on this as well, and it falls to health and safety and all the previous student achievement. And that is to look at the previous strategic plan that is now concluded and see which items were assigned to your particular committee, see which ones need to move away, meaning they go to another committee like the committee of the whole, or which ones you think you've achieved and they're done, or ones that you'd like to keep. So I know each committee has to be doing that, and I think that'll be helpful. We did it, and it's kind of an interesting thing that we did, and it's on page 2 of the minutes. We also, for our action items, the Treasurer Wagner will share the department's key performance indicator measures. Also, we're working through a number of things, particularly monthly financials, which are attached to the report. We also, as we mentioned earlier, did bring it to the attention, as Treasurer did, bring it to our attention that indeed there is a wealth of financial knowledge and information in the Ohio report card. We had an update on both the facilities and also transportation, but we've already mentioned the issue regarding those swipe cards that we need to have. And we are continuing to talk about some sort of bus fleet, the internal bus fleet, and van fleet, quite possibly. And then also, there is a correction on page 4, and it's my fault that I didn't catch this. This information we brought back to Finance in October. The committee, Chair Bolton, informed the committee that Board President Lindy would like information, and it's not about those swipe cards. Mr. Lindy's interest is the idea of on tardiness, knowing the difference between 5 minutes late versus a substantially late. And I think we've had an email about that to the superintendent and whatever, but it is incorrect, and so we'll have to revise these minutes just on that item. And then also, the last piece is that preschool promise master agreement is hopefully getting close to being done, but we also know that President Lindy and also CFT President Sellers have been in discussion about the issue of the what is previously known as the Workforce Development Council and how that fits within the agreement. And once again, knowing me, I did have to raise the fact that we are going through the reserve funds that have been accumulating throughout the life of Preschool Promise. And so any new agreement better be very careful, very cognizant of any additional expense, or we will be back to the voters long before we told them we would be. So that's, I submit and hope for approval.
Thank you, Chair Bolton. Do we have any questions for the Finance Chair? Okay, hearing none. Do I have a motion to accept the committee reports with the friendly, it's not an amendment of a motion yet, but I think as noted by Ms. Bolton? Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have had our discussion, but last call. Anything else anyone would like to discuss here? Yes, Dr. Moffitt.
To Committee Chair Weinberg, what was the deadline for the transportation grant? Has that passed already? I can't remember.
I think it is passed, but I think we were awarded. Were we awarded something that I read about?
I think you gave us some information about that, but
Yes.
to make sure.
I did. We received the information actually from that meeting, and the deadline was that Sunday. So we shared it with all of our schools. We did get word that one of our schools was awarded, but it was a grant that individual schools had to apply for. It wasn't a grant that a district could apply for all of them.
So only one of our schools did it already?
Correct. And we've only been notified that one of them was awarded.
Okay, thank you. That was it.
Any other discussion? Yeah, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Committee reports are approved. So we'll move next to, I think, a couple of quick updates on governance coaching. For folks who have not been tuning in for a while, our board is going through a process with the Council of Great City Schools to strengthen our approach to board governance. we're going to hear an update from Board Member Craig.
So let me start by saying thank you to all of my fellow board members who have, in the time that we've asked them, signed up for different assignments, as well as for the different engagement and outreach sessions, as well as we had a request made for everyone to sign up for a training so that we can make sure that we're all prepared to go out and talk with folks and understand what we're going to be doing in our roles. So quick update is that we have assigned approximately, I think it's like 25 different sessions that we're doing with various community partners, and that we will be scheduling times over the next month or so. We will be taking that information from our goals and guardrails that all of you all who stay so diligently watching us at our previous board meeting got to see us in action. We'll be taking that information to our public to get feedback. And so we've asked each board member to sign up so we make sure that we're all operating with the same understanding, the same agenda, and everyone has done that as of now. So everyone has really been on top of their game. I appreciate that from everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Any questions from other board members on any of this? Ms. Bolden?
Yeah, on the guardrails and goals, I know that we received something back from Great City Schools about rewrites. Did I miss that earlier this evening when I was late, or when are we going to be doing that?
No, so I think you should have gotten a document last week that has the record of what we discussed in the board meeting last, and none of that has changed. And so that's the version that the teams of two who are going to hosting the community feedback sessions will be getting feedback on. The next chance we'll have to update or change any of those things will be when we meet again once we've collected the feedback.
Will we be using the goals and guardrails that we wrote in our meeting, or the Great City School revisions?
So my understanding is we're not changing anything. So they're making some suggestions, but that nobody has agreed to change them.
Excellent. Thank you.
But I also would just encourage you in the training session that you're going to go to, you could ask Cindy. But my perspective would be we haven't had that discussion as a group, and so we have to do that as a group. Excellent. Any other questions here? Okay, then we will move to the superintendent of schools. Do we have some retirements to announce this evening?
Do not.
We have no retirements. All right, so then I need a motion to accept the superintendent's recommendations.
I'll move.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Do we have any discussion or questions on the superintendent's recommendations? Ms. Bolden.
Just one. It's on page 4, and it's part of the teacher in charge section. And I don't know if this is for the superintendent or for the treasurer, but it not questioning of what that means, because I always ask and everybody tells me what it means. But I noticed that the sources of funds are Title I for teacher in charge.
Sounds odd.
Yeah, it sounds weird.
It's for summer, so it must be a summer school kind of activity, but I can follow up for you.
Would you please, because it just seems like a weird use of Title I. But I'm not questioning it, I just was confused by it.
Board Member Bolton, you are referencing the one that's listed there for Title I, right?
Yeah, it does not include the rest of those, right?
Right.
Excellent.
Correct.
Okay, good.
That's correct.
I wasn't very clear.
Oh,
Thanks.
that's okay.
Thank you, Ms. Board Member Bolden. Do we have other discussion or questions on the superintendent's recommendations? Dr. Moffitt?
I gotta find it, huh? I know that on page 3, or on the last part, the recommendation 3 for the MOU for planning, that's with regard to paying the teachers, and now there has to be an agreement. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that would potentially impact any budget to have teachers get paid now rather than it be voluntary?
So the actual MOU is to pay teachers to cover a class, to actually teach a class on their planning time. So the CBA gives teachers a certain amount of time for planning. During the time of COVID, the district entered into an MOU with CFT to cover classes during that time because there were not subs available. What we're finding now, and this was actually an ask that came back to us from CFT, is there are some teachers that are fine with continuing to cover classes, and classes are broken up if there's not a sub available, and there are some that are not because there was a point in time that they did get paid to do it. And so that's why it's being brought back at this point. In terms of overall subs that we have, though, it doesn't appear that there would be a challenge. But there is in some schools. So sub stays on the approved sub list as long as their license and their certification is still intact. They're not purged from the system for not taking jobs. So currently we have 116 long-term subs and we have 359 day-to-day subs. So it should appear that we have enough subs. We have an average of about 230 teacher absences a day. So you would think that with 359 daily subs, it would cover the 230, but subs are not required to pick up jobs. And so there are some schools that this is a greater challenge for than others because there are some subs that they have preferred places that they will go. So that becomes the ask. The difference in terms of it's difficult at this point to talk about what the budget implication would be because the difference is if a teacher is out and there is a sub in the class, we will be paying the sub. If a teacher is covering it, we pay them for that 1 hour of time that they would be covering the class instead of the sub pay for that day.
So do we keep the data on coverage currently? I mean, do we have data that says, okay, for the month of August, or let's say September, this many teachers had to cover classes during their planning, and that's what I'm looking for. So that data, whether we bring a sub in or not, but do we collect data on how many hours are being covered that we will potentially have to pay for now versus before?
Thank you for the question. We have not collected data up until this point because we have not been paying the teachers to cover the classes. So teachers have been covering schools, split classes, send so many students to so many classes, or if it's in a high school, teachers that are on planning that are willing to cover, go in and cover during that time. Administrators do the same thing. So we've not collected information up to this point. Where we would go moving forward is the process that was in place when this came up during COVID was it would go to the school site. The school site would have to verify that, yes, there was a sub. There was a sub that did not have there was a teacher that did not have a substitute teacher for the class, so then it had to be covered by another teacher, and then it's cross-referenced at that point, signed off on by the principal and the teacher, and then that's added to the teacher.
Okay, so but we can collect the data moving forward, though,
Yes,
right?
we can.
So there was also some information regarding summer pay of the staff in the report. Are we able to get like a report of how much summer scholars actually cost us so that we can I mean, it's October and I'm like, well, we're still talking about summer. So is it possible to get is that preventing us from getting a definitive answer on how much the budget was for the summer?
Sure, that's fine.
So September 30th was our deadline to submit the final expenditure reports for all state and federal grants. And it takes more than a minute for all the vendors to send to us their invoices, and we had to chase them all down when they had purchase orders that had not been charged or there was still money left. And so since that process happened on Friday, we should get some reports this midweek on where that played out.
Okay. And then my last question is, I was looking at the paraprofessional salary, and it looks like, can you confirm that our paraprofessionals, the highest that they're making is $18.21 an hour?
That's accurate for non-special needs paras, and they make about $19.71. is for a special needs para, but that's accurate.
Okay, thank you. Those were all my only questions.
Thank you, Dr. Moffat. Do we have any other questions or discussion on the superintendent's recommendations? So first, we have a second. Ms. Wagner, would you call the roll, please?
There it goes. I have a defective microphone, just saying. Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffat?
Yes.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes, thank you very much. My understanding is that we have 2 typos to correct on the treasurer's report, but maybe we'll do that during discussion as a friendly amendment. So can we have a motion to adopt the treasurer's recommendations, please?
I move to adopt the revised treasurer's report.
Just for clarity, are you revising those 2 typos before we've talked about them?
There's a big
Just
addition.
the revision.
We'll
Okay.
do the 2 typos too.
Okay, we can do both. So we have a motion to accept the revised treasurer's report. Do we have a second? Thank you, Dr. Moffat. For discussion, Ms. Wagner, would you mention the corrections, please?
Yes, sir. On page 4, item A, the date, under the purpose statement, it says the last sentence, original agreement was approved October 3rd of 22. That would be today. So it was really December 20th of 2020. This is an amendment to a contract. So the original contract was approved in December of 2020, just for your reference. And then the second one is on page 14, my 14, item A, under amendments to agreements. The P&C memo for $2,500 is really for the facilities department, not athletics. I apologize for those typos.
Thank you, Treasurer Wagner. Any discussion on anything in the revised treasurer's report? Bolton?
I just have 2. One is on the page that is titled contracts, so towards the end. And it's for the advanced placement exams to students for the school year. And it lists in the department name, Walnut Hills. Is that only for Walnut Hills, or is it for all of our students that are taking APs?
This was a requisition that was submitted by Walnut Hills.
Okay, so do we have, do our other schools submit such requisitions?
On occasion, yes.
Okay.
Yes, I'll also add there. So we also, so that all of our schools, as shared in, I think, 2 board meetings ago, so that all of our schools have, all of our students have access to AP coursework. We do offer AP support teachers for all of our schools. And so that particular request generally comes from curriculum, from curriculum and instruction.
Okay, so we would be looking, unless I've missed it along the way, which is very possible, we would be expecting to see another request from either curriculum or individual schools.
For AP
So
testing.
that our other students are not having, okay, great, thank
That's
you.
correct.
And then my other one for the treasurer was on the amendments. It's a number of them. Wilson Language Training Corporation. It's listed 8 times for the same amount. Is that, should that be totaled, or is that a repeat of the same $188,799?
So there's separate lines on, with different funding lines, but the total amendment is the last line. So it starts with the first amendment, a new total, the second amendment, a new total. So the total is $196,422.20.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for example, the original amount was 188,000. The first amendment added 460, so it totaled 189. The second amendment added $36.80.
Gotcha.
Okay.
So it's a total in the last column, as Mr. Craig just pointed out to me, versus the individual amounts going down the list.
Yes.
Thank you. So it does fit underneath the 200,000.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Other questions or discussion on the revised treasurer's report? Hearing none, Ms. Wagner, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffett? Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. Thank you, everyone. So we're going to move now into board matters. I think all three of these came from Ms. Bolton, and I think we've covered at least the transportation update. But do you want to speak briefly to LSDMC policy and district organization?
So we have in a policy committee, we've been past couple meetings have taken up all our community facing policies. So LSDMC is obviously a big one of those, non-school organizations is one, et cetera. The LSDMC one is a fairly large policy that underwent, I think, a lot of revisions right around when I joined the board. A lot of this work was going on, and Ms. Bolton was really heavily involved in it. And as we think about LSDMCs now and under the superintendent's leadership and using the infrastructure of the LSDMCs to promote our anti-racism work and training, et cetera, which she led in Detroit in her last district, we thought it was pertinent to bring the policy back out and go through it and look at it, but we wanted to this is really an announcement probably more than board matters, to be perfectly honest, but we wanted everybody here on the board to have the opportunity to know that we wanted your eyes on it if you want to take a look at it while we're considering it. We're not going to probably bring it forward with any revisions, if there are any, for at least another month or so, but just kind of wanted to put that out there. And then also while I'm talking, this is probably, I don't want to say out of line, but it'll be in the policy minutes. We did do the audit, the presentation, President Lindy, regarding the purchasing of goods and services. So if you didn't get a copy of it, I'll get you a copy of it. It was pretty solid. We got a long way to go, but we definitely made a policy that he helped to rewrite with Bolton me last year. So
That's great.
but I just want to get everyone put your eyes on it.
If you wouldn't mind sharing a copy with me.
Transportation, we dealt with the district organization. We touched on briefly in the discussion of the ad hoc minutes. And district organization is not about the district organizing bureaucratically or administratively. It's only bringing to the attention of the board that the ad hoc group is really doing some substantive work. And some of it, a lot of it will depend on the audit that the administration is doing regarding programming. But there's a lot of it that isn't about programming too, and the way we might organize the district. We have a guest on our screen.
Keep going. Keep going.
Anyway, the point is about the separate school system, so to speak, the idea of neighborhood schools and some of the things that partners reported out. So this is just a heads up for the board to begin to be thinking about how the district is organized. How we can envision the organization as we move forward, but more particularly how it can impact, as well as the fact that I think, as the chair of ad hoc mentioned, bringing back some of our recommendations in a phased approach rather than an end of the year, here's the report, take it or leave it kind of thing. So I think it's a heads up is I think we'll be talking about this kind of thing through a number of board meetings as we go forward. And I'm really just a heads up from members that are on the committee, Jones and Moffett and myself. I think there's a lot of synergy happening with that committee right now.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Vice President Jones.
I'm going to piggyback on that for a minute, and I agree 100% with Board Member Bolton's comments about it. However, I do want to suggest, and I think the committee is in agreement about this, that the ad hoc function cannot continue for years. I mean, like a regular committee. And just as long as we understand that we're prepared to do our work plan and establish a timeline for achieving that, so that the scope of our work is not beyond, it is not getting our hands in the work as much as it is planning around that and coordinating the phases of that. So I just wanted to make that known, make that comment around that.
Thank you, Vice President Jones. Anything else under board matters, or we'll move to, I know we have a couple inquiries and updates I want to make sure we get to.
So I had asked if
Dr. Moffitt?
I had asked if my update for the city CPS meeting could be added to board matters. I don't see it here, but I think it would be kind of applicable to talk about it here. Is it okay to bring that up?
That is very fine to bring up.
Okay. Well, great. So Mr. Craig and I were charged, gosh, it seems like months ago now, to look at the rebirth of the city and CPS meeting that we had years ago entitled ACES. And we, the city, we met with Vice Mayor Carney, who was super excited to reinvigorate that committee. So some possible, we talked about October as a potential day, but that is now here. And so it won't be in October, but maybe quarterly. We could look at maybe starting in November, it would be her health and safety or Healthy Neighborhoods meeting that she would invite all of the city council members to attend. And then a potential place that we talked about, a potential date is November the 10th from 6 to 8 at Woodward. And that was brought up because of the transportation issue that, you know, Woodward's centrally located. They have had meetings there as a city council, and they are familiar with the technology capabilities there. So they would, that was their suggestion. The email would go out to the city manager, the mayor, the CPS school board, city council, and superintendent, publicly noticed, just like a regular meeting. We talked about potential topics being tax incentives and Brandon, what was the other one? It was tax incentives, abatements, getting the community to understand that, pedestrian safety. And I'm going to also defer to my other colleague to add to this as well.
Yeah, I think we talked about kind of having those discussions around those topics where we have a shared responsibility or interest, and really just being more informational and being able to talk about what we're both doing to understand better where we are. And so, yeah, it was around things like tax incentives, but also around things like health, you know, healthy, safety, safe streets, transportation, the roles that both the city and the school district are playing in those particular areas, as well as dealing with the issue of things like poverty within our communities and that kind of stuff, and how it affects both of our roles in that process.
We talked about maybe a building plan, housing and food deserts, services for students and families experiencing homelessness, and maybe career tech and career pathways initiative updates that the district and the city are wanting to work on. So November the 10th is the tentative date. We want to be able to send something out and see what you all think along with the other city council members. And Brandon had a name for the meeting, although I'm not exactly sure. We can't remember what it was. It was so great in the moment, but we can't remember exactly. But that's just an update on where we were and what we were charged to do.
The only other thing I would add to that is that I think one of the things that we took from this conversation also is that with so many new members of city council who have not experienced and don't always have the same knowledge base as to how the district operates and what are our responsibilities and our obligations, it's also really informative for them as well to understand this is why some of these things that we keep pushing for and keep asking for and keep wanting are so important, because I think we have such different perspectives on, you know, how those things affect us.
Yeah.
From our role as a school with the district and their role with the city. And so it's just a helpful way to inform and be more of a summit to discuss and think about more so than to take some certain specific action.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. So to the two of you, Dr. Moffitt and Mr. Craig, is there an action you need the board to take tonight? Is this to just inform us of the update? Is there information that's being requested?
There was no action. We just came up with the date of November, the potential date of November the 10th. We'll be sending out an email once we announced it to CPS board. Vice Mayor Kearney was going to announce it to City Council, and then we would just kind of start the planning process.
Well, thank you both for doing that. I appreciate it. Any other questions for either of our representatives here? Okay, moving along. Do we have any other inquiries and updates? Ms. Bolton.
Yes. I have
Followed by Mrs. Weinberg.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's rough sitting at that end of the table, isn't it? Did it for 7 years. At any rate, I want to continue something I asked about last meeting, and that is this decision that was made to extend the Iowa testing RFP, and the question as to, well, it got extended, but and it was in our minutes. It was extended by the department, the testing and evaluation department, I guess, and didn't know if there's some sort of administrative guidelines as to how a department can extend something for a year like the RFP it was, especially after, we've gone through this Iowa testing as it pertains to Walnut particularly for a few years. So I have an inquiry about what have we been able, I did talk to the treasurer about it, and we I probably have some need to have, and I don't think it's an assignment, but it's a follow-up as to whether or not we've looked into that opportunity to figure out how a department had the ability or capacity. Is it who approved such an extension of the RFP for that particular testing group? I think we.
So on occasion, I've had departments reach out to me for approval to delay the RFP process for a year because of circumstances.
Okay.
But I don't know that we have a formal written policy. I could certainly get with the purchasing department who manages that process and see what they have.
That would be really useful because, again, we've spent a disproportionate amount of time both in student achievement and on the board, some of the issues that arrived at because we changed the testing. And the justification was that we couldn't nationally norm something or what have you. But it seems that's a big power for someone to have, and I wanted to know who would, what the process is. So if you would, that's great. I didn't mean it to be an assignment, but didn't know if there was an update. I also have been told by our partners, and this is an update, that I guess not surprisingly, and they understand, due to the transportation problem, we are having some issues getting our students to the dental services that the district provides and the vision services. And just, I know that they probably need to know that we brought it to you, and that would be an update from them. They seldom complain. Matter of fact, all the years I've never gotten a call from them, and indeed it is becoming a problem. They have that capacity and not be able to deliver on it. And finally, promise, Mr. President, the General Counsel's aware of this, and you all were. We have signed on to that legal case regarding fair funding and vouchers, Hurt Ohio, if you'll recall. And we had Mr. Hoyne and myself attend their first meeting after we signed on, and then I attended the second meeting. And they have finally gotten a hearing this month, but the urgent thing, I can't believe it's urgent, but they would like it. Mr. Hoyne's going to present some sort of a resolution at our next board meeting. Is that correct? At our next board meeting, but they are very much interested in knowing if indeed I will be the representative to their steering committee and because they want to put Cincinnati on this letter prior to the hearing. And I don't know if we needed to have a resolution or it can be a consensus thing, unless anybody else wants to do this. Please raise your hand. If there's a way we could at least tell them, the head guy, tomorrow morning, that I will be that representative so that they can then put Cincinnati on the letter. I think that's correct. And I don't know if it requires a resolution. We wanted a resolution, but he has one ready. So, I mean, can we just at least say informally tonight, no vote, no nothing, that
No,
I would, okay, I would be that person?
We won't leave that blank. We'll put E. Bolton in there.
Oh,
So,
okay. All right, well, that would be good. I'd like to tell them.
Yeah.
Is that okay with everybody?
Stick it to him, Bolton.
Listen, I'm the new kid on the block. I don't say anything at that meeting.
Yep. We've discussed it and we agreed to participate. It's just a matter of designating someone or signing one to that committee.
Yes,
So-
and Mr. Hoyne advises
Okay.
me.
Great.
Thank you.
And we know-
Okay, I'll be able to
Any
tell
other
them.
inquiries and updates? Ms. Weinberg and then Mr. Morosky.
Yes, this is for Superintendent Wright. I just have two quick inquiries. My first one would be regarding your weekly update in which you alert us on the positions that are open in terms of teachers. I do have a question on what is the process for any particular teacher who has an outstanding teacher contract, and what is the procedure or the length of time to correct that?
Thank you. So we identified I'm sorry, I said identified last week. Last week, we notified teachers that still had not received their corrected contract, that the information would be updated. So we provided that notice, I want to say last Thursday, to all of those that were waiting for their contract so that they would receive them updated in Frontline by the end of this week.
Okay. My second question is regarding elementary athletics. I know that you stated that you would be getting back with us on that, and I wanted to know in terms of, I think there was a survey sent out. When will the board be getting the information regarding what you found, and how did you select who the survey was going to be sent out to as well?
Great. So the survey was sent to all elementary schools that have those particular sports for the season. It was sent to the principal and to the athletic coordinator for the school. They were asked to get input from their families. The responses to the survey were sent back to me at the end of the week on Friday. However, there were no responses from any parents. And so I sent it back to the team to ask if we could send it back out so that we could get some feedback specifically from parents as well. So that's what we're waiting for at this point.
In regards to the feedback that you got, excuse me, what particular sports were included and why?
If you give me just a second, I can tell you specifically, because I'm actually on my computer right now. So the survey was for 4th through 6th grade soccer and football programming.
And what was the reasoning behind choosing those two sports?
Because those were the current ones for the fall. So it's just doing the ones for the fall. We're hopeful that we're being optimistic that we may not have the same challenge with transportation by the time we come to our next series of sports, but that was the reason.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Other inquiries or updates? Mr. Morosky.
Thank you, President Lindy. And I'm sure all of my colleagues are aware of this. And I wondered if the general counsel could give us a 2 cents type of opinion on it. So you probably saw that the Ohio State Board of Education is proposing a resolution encouraging the state to not abide by Title IX protections for LGBTQ students. I'm sorry, obviously it's serious. The only reason it's so bizarre that a state board of education thinks they can sort of tell the federal government what to do. If this happened, just so people know, and all the schools in Ohio had to stop protecting LGBTQ plus students and transgender students, we would lose federal funding, which means we'd lose Title I money, which means we wouldn't have schools. So I'm just curious if you could tell us, A, does this bat blank crazy resolution have any legs? And B, if it does, I would love to prepare a resolution saying we will not do it.
Glad to provide whatever resolution the board directs, but no, the State Board of Education does not interpret Title IX or enforce Title IX. So
Great.
I would think it would have little to no effect.
Okay, I just wanted to get that on the record. Thank you.
Good for you, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Moraski. Other inquiries or updates? I'll try to go as quick as I can. I had 2 items here. One is very swift, but for the CAL meeting on the 12th, board members may see that gets noticed as a business meeting. The reason why is there are some new hires, I believe teacher hires, that would go through a set of superintendent's recommendations at that meeting. Superintendent, do you want to speak to that at all?
Right. So thank you, Board President. So we anticipate new hires across the board. We are continuing to do job fairs as well. And so one of our concerns right now is with there being the lapse, waiting until the end of the month to be able to approve new hires. So that would be the main reason.
So if when people see that come through from the board office, there's no change to the agenda other than we're going to vote on a superintendent's recommendations to get those hires started. Any questions about that? The second one, Eve and I had a chance to chat this morning, and I think there's a question about Saturday, October the 15th, that I want to make sure we address as a group for a moment. When the board calendar was released for the year, there were 2 work sessions on it, one for January, one for October. As we've gone through the work with the governance coaching, one idea that I believe, that he'll correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Craig had suggested, was that we make that time available for people if they wanted to use it to schedule some of their community engagement work that needs to get done over the course of the next month. No one would need to use that time, but that was time people were holding on their calendar already. And I think the thought was that's one way of making the scheduling of this a little bit easier for people. So I shared that information with the board in my most recent update. And Eve pointed out to me that our bylaws say that we're going to hold 2 work sessions over the course of the year. I think subsequent to our conversation, Eve, I wanted to make sure I did all my homework and I talked to Dan just to understand more about what we could or couldn't do. And as I understand it, it is up to the majority of the board. And I would love to support wherever the majority of the board is on this. I think the assumption that I was making is that people would prefer to have that time on Saturday the 15th back in order to be able to do some scheduling here, but I might be incorrect about that. And so I wanted to just hear from anybody who has a strong opinion, whether you would prefer to have a work session on the 15th or have that time available for scheduling community engagement pieces. Ms. Bolton?
Thank you. And I did send an email to Ben because it is in the bylaws that we have 2 work sessions for board development and planning. And as a matter of fact, I think it was Vice President Jones that insisted upon that in the rewrites a while back because we weren't doing either of those the way we should be. And I understand totally that people think that as we're working through governance and what have you, those maybe in our minds could count, but they can't count instead of the strategic plan, superintendent evaluation, the beginning of the budget process, and all the things that we have to do anyway. And so as we've engaged in these extra meetings, and I'm as overwhelmed as anyone is with all this additional responsibility and efforts, particularly in the engagement piece, I just would really think that it would be bad planning on our part to not use those 5 hours to do regular board work in both development and in planning. And I'm glad that Ben has brought it to the table because he can't decide that alone. But of course, if the majority would rather not do that and instead would like to use it for engagement or nothing, I just would really encourage us to rethink that, because you're going to have to be doing budgeting. You're going to have to be doing the 5-year plan. You're going to have to be doing the work anyway. So it's obviously, I'll agree with whatever the majority wants to do.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Do we have other board members who'd like to weigh in? I'd just like to share, I think, my perspective that we've done so much good work, I think, on board development through the meeting on the 12th and the 19th, both of which were extended meetings. I would very much like to honor that and give people some time back. I just want to be thoughtful about not doing that without the clear approval of a majority of board members. So I think there is a difference of perspective, so it'd be helpful to hear from some other folks about where they are, and we'll do whatever the majority wants to do.
Could I add one thing? I want us to do the board's work in public, and that's board work. And we need to be doing those bigger things with the public.
Perspective from other board members? Dr. Moffitt.
I'll just share that I was always kind of very excited about the governance training, and I still am. But I do think that there is validity to having designated work sessions be just that, for information outside of the governance training. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed and stressed with that, just to be very honest. It's I love it. I love the work that we're doing, but I feel like we're crunching and we're compensating to crunch. And so I don't want to take this time back, do that work. I want to do some of the work that I personally would like to do some of the work that I think we need to. I've said this publicly, and I will say this again. I enjoy learning from my colleagues and listening to their ideas, and we don't have a lot of time to do that. So when we have budgeted time for me to be able to actually deliberate on for business outside of the governance, I would like to preserve it. So that's just my personal opinion. But I will go with what everyone wants.
So I think the question is, do we have, thank you, Dr. Moffitt, I appreciate that. We have 2 board members who would like to see us hold the session on the 15th. Do we have anybody other than me who would like to give it back to people? Because we'll just have it if I'm the only one. Mr. Morosky, Ms.
I'm
Weinberg.
fine with giving the time back.
Okay, Mrs. Weinberg.
I would be fine with giving the time back.
I can't hear anything they said. I didn't hear what they said.
No, I just said I was fine with giving the time back. I mean, I hear what Ms. Bolton is saying regarding the bylaws, and certainly what Dr. Moffitt is saying about the work piece. I mean, they're related, certainly,
Okay.
but I respect both points, but if I had to pick, which I do, I think, I would probably pick time back.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Did you raise there more?
I was just going to repeat that basically I agree with what he said as well.
So, Mr. Craig, Ms. Jones, or Vice President Jones, either of you have a perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I understand, and I do respect the need for us to be able to talk and work through some of the other business that we do in those meetings, in the work meetings. I do think, though, that we've been doing a lot of stuff that's overlapping onto some of the work as well. And so, while I don't think they're completely overlapping, and so I take that to a fair point, I'm also okay with giving back the time. With that understanding, though, also that there are some stuff that we're going to have to figure out post November 8th that I also think may be more pertinent than it, hopefully in a positive way, than it will be pre-November 8th. But
Thank you, Mr. Craig. And Vice President Jones.
Yeah, Ms. Bolton made the comment that we established that policy last year to try to make sure that we took the time for ourselves to really do that board development and board planning piece. The community engagement stuff is really critical, I believe, but I believe that we've pretty much, people have already kind of thought through how they're going to schedule those meetings and things. And so I'm not convinced that we need the time for that. I do think it's important because we have a lot of board business that we do, and that's what I'm hearing from people. So I would say I would be comfortable with just leaving it as a board work session and doing board work on that day if that's what the committee wants. So I would be okay with that.
Well, this is much tighter than I thought it was going to be. I think it's 4-3. And so I think we'll go with a 4. But I appreciate everybody talking through it together and raising it in
I
public.
don't really want to do anything on Saturdays.
Thanks, Vice President Jones. So I think we're now at the item on the agenda for assignments. Are there any assignments from board members?
I had asked, I think we had
Dr. Moffett.
we had a discussion, but it didn't really, in checking with Phyllis and Pat, it didn't really get to an official assignment. But when we got the information about the, I think we worded it, Phyllis, it was like, I asked that we form a youth voice group around SROs specifically and have it be a group of students, if it's done by the administration, a group of students that specifically work on school safety and understanding the MOU and SRO involvement, not just have it be a topic of discussion for the group. So I'd asked that be, that we consider that as an assignment to have youth voice specifically talk about school safety and SROs as a group. And I don't think we looked through the minutes, and it was kind of we talked about it, the discussion was there, but there was I'd asked for it to be an assignment, but so that was what I'm bringing back to the table.
I have a memory that we talked about this in the group, and that the decision was the other decision that you had shared at that part of the meeting, Dr. Moffett, that you were okay with that falling into the broader scope, which is different from what I think you're saying now. Would you like to propose that as an assignment now?
Well, I think when we read it back, I always wanted it to be separate. I think the superintendent brought up that she was forming a youth group to meet with administration, and I don't want it to be a topic. I want it to be an actual group of students that work on school safety and understanding the SRO piece and in alignment with school safety. So that's where we kind of left it. We went back and read the notes and we kind of left it there. So I am asking for a group of youth voice to be convened specifically around that and representing all the schools. That's what I'm asking. I asked for that at the same time.
So I think there's a motion from Dr. Moffett to do what she is asking. Is there a second?
I'm confused. Well, I'll wait until you get the motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
So there's a motion and a second, and then we have a chance for some discussion. We'll start with Vice President Jones.
Yes, I'm a little bit confused. Is it an assignment, or there's a motion on the floor to do a group? Was this? I remember when you brought that to the floor, and it was an assignment, and I guess I assumed that you were making that assignment to administration.
Yes.
Okay, then it's an assignment.
Sorry, finish your thought.
Okay.
No.
So I'm confused why is it a motion? Why is it coming to the floor as a motion?
I think there's actually a difference of opinion about whether it was an assignment in the first place. So my memory of that meeting that was it's just different. And so I think there's a motion now to list this as a separate group as opposed to it falling within the broader category, which is a perfectly fine thing to do. Now is exactly the right time to do that. And any assignment can be made with a majority of the board in a public meeting. Mrs. Weinberg.
So now I am a little confused. Originally, I thought it was an assignment, and I thought I heard that Dr. Moffett said that it was an assignment, and she was just asking for an update regarding that assignment. Is that what I'm hearing correctly?
Yes, it was an assignment that I was asking to clarify publicly as an assignment. But it was an assignment, and when we went back to read the discussion, there was confusion on what the assignment was. Mm-hmm. So it was always an assignment for the administration to form the group of student voice. The discussion part was, hey, we already have a group. I'm going to form a group. We can have this as a topic. I don't want it to be a topic. I want it to be a specific group of students to work on school safety, but it's always been an assignment.
So I have not refreshed that part of the meeting very recently. I'd be happy to go back and take a look at it. I do have a different memory of what happened. Superintendent, do you have any piece you want to add, you don't need to, but
I just, whatever the will of the board is, I can move forward with the will of the board. I think that we are still in the process of identifying those student voice members and a process to organize a group that would do just that. And so if we're being asked to do now 2 of those, we just need to have some kind of opportunity to do such. And Dr. Moffitt, to Dr. Moffitt's point, I do recall this conversation, and I do recall me saying as a part of the conversation that it seemed that this could be a topic that the student voice group could discuss, but we have not moved forward with really establishing that group yet. There have just been some other things that we've had to work through. And so whatever the will of the board is, we'll move forward.
thank you, Superintendent. So I think where we are, we had a request for an assignment with a motion and a second, and we were discussing that. I think we'd move forward and call a vote on it, unless there's more discussion or questions, particularly from folks who haven't gone yet. Mr. Morosky.
Thank you, President Lindy, and thank you, Dr. Moffitt, and Ms. Weinberg for the second. So this might seem strange, but as the one person who voted against even having the SROs in the school, while I am also extraordinarily interested in student voice, as you know, I find where I am right now today, and last time we talked about it, I remember when we talked about it too, and it just seemed like there wasn't will to make it a formal assignment. And that's why I thought it just sort of went away, which I'm glad we're having an opportunity to talk about it more. But for me, taking that one issue, particularly after the fact when we had heard from students and heard from for 3 years, and then went ahead and voted for it anyway, which is fine, and we're going to support it and make it better, and I think this could potentially make it better, right? But I think within that broader student voice group, it probably fits. And the only reason I'm there and not with this formal assignment of a group that does that expressly is because there's so many different issues that I then think, well, now we're going to need a team of students to do cafeteria and food access. We're going to need a team, which would be great, but I don't know if it's tenable. That's the only reason I would want to say, I don't know if we need a group that does that specifically, because I hear what you're saying, and I do dig it in principle, but I think a broader student voice group may be more impactful. I don't know. I'm kind of ranting, so I'll shut up, but that's kind of just where I'm at. I don't know that I would be in favor of let's have this one group that does that one thing.
Well,
for a whole host of reasons. But that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Are there any folks who have not spoken yet who want to go? If not,
so
Dr.
just to
Moffitt.
clarify, because I had an opportunity to read the minutes from September 3rd from Ms. Phyllis. So I specifically said school safety and not just the SRO piece and the MOU. And then I also specifically asked that they work with like Mr. Bell because he's been a CPD officer. So I understand and I don't see a problem with having student groups work with food and school safety. And I think it's wonderful to have multiple groups of students who have an interest maybe in one particular thing to talk about that one particular thing. Then it be a specific group of students to represent 36,000 students on a topic that comes up for the month, and then we're on to another topic. That is the reason why I think that it's just beneficial to have this be about, let's put student voices at the table regarding school safety. And if we get 50 students that sign up they're signing up to talk about school safety, that's significant. If we get 25 students that talk about cafeteria food, that's what they signed up for. So I asked for school safety. I asked for with the inclusion of the SRO and the MOU because that I wanted them to be able to understand it. And I just wanted to clarify to you what I was asking for.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Superintendent?
So I think the only thing that I would need clarification on would be, as we talk about student voice, I would like for us to make sure we are aligned around that. Are we talking about sessions that we do with students specific to the one topic, as I was thinking about student voice, I was thinking about a superintendent steering committee group made up of students that as I meet with them monthly, we would talk about different topics through that. So are we talking about one and the same or two different things?
Oh, you wanted me to ask? So I can, to me, that's more along the lines of your how and how you do that. I can
Okay.
tell you what I envision. I don't think that a small group of students should represent the mass. I just don't. I think that you should have multiple students groups representing diverse populations. And I'm very cautious about having 20 or 30 students represent, even if you have one from each high school, let's say. I just think that it's unfair to say you represent everybody and then take this back. I think that there's benefit in small group sessions and where you're engaging people with intentionality around the topic that they're interested in. I think that there's benefit in having a group. So I would never say to do one or the other. I think you can do all of the above. But what I'm asking for is, can we be intentional with respect to school safety in including youth voice, particularly inclusive of the topic around SROs, gun violence. I mean, we can talk about anything regarding school safety, but because we've heard from a group, I specifically told them, I said, your voice, just because we didn't give you the result that you wanted doesn't mean we're not listening. I would like for us to continue to listen to them and educate them on some things that they didn't quite get the full benefit of, and to provide them an opportunity and a space to be able to hear from a diverse group of people around the topic that they are passionate about. So that, I'm going to give you that charge. I think it can be, idealistically, I'd love to see it be an and, but you can do whatever it is that you want to do in getting that done. We can do that on the board level as well, but that's the answer to your question.
So thank you for the question and thank you for the response. I'm going to do my very best to work us through parliamentary procedure with all of this. Any board member can make any motion they want. Been seconded. With discussion, everybody can speak twice. So I don't think we've heard from Vice President Jones yet.
Right.
So please.
I'm struggling with this because I don't feel like, anybody can make a motion. I get that. My opinion is authentic youth voice is determined by the youth. And we should not be saying, we want a specific youth group to talk about that. And I'm basing that on the experience since I've been here about when we tried to organize youth voice. And we've done that successfully. It's the sustaining of the momentum that continues to be a challenge for us for whatever reason. And I think that this particular topic, it's not the topic in and of itself, but I think for me, it's an initiative around how we build on youth voice and what the purpose of that is and how it helps us and how it impacts us more than it is about the topic itself. So I'm saying, my comfort level is with having an initiative where and a strategic initiative and focus around an emphasis on gauging youth voice around a number of topics, but it's not us to decide that. So that's where I am as far as what the motion is for right now.
Thank you, Vice President Jones.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you finished?
No, I'm okay.
So anybody who's not gone twice have a perspective? Ms. Bolton?
On this topic, I haven't gone once on this. And my issue right now is that I totally understand where Dr. Moffat's coming from as this is running throughout the air, safety and concerns and what have you. But the board's passed a resolution to keep the SROs. And more particularly, as we found out in policy, the state is requiring an entire course for our students regarding police and student relationships and demanding that, requiring that. And I made the mistake in policy to say that some of that, particularly the expression and kids understanding their rights and what have you, would be in American government. checked with some social studies teachers, and the social studies teachers have said, oh no, this whole police issue and whatever is actually going to be a full course. And we're going to be folding other things into the social studies. So I think that I'd like to see that evolve a bit more before we start to talk about another group that's going to have that as their specific charge. And I think that the student voice thing, I'm interested to know from the superintendent's perspective about her student cabinet and that being a topic. The other piece of it, we had a community safety town hall, the first one that I can recall in 15 years, and we had that. So, I mean, it's happening. I understand sustaining some healthy dialogue, but I don't know that this is necessarily the time to do it right now. And I don't remember it as an assignment, but I do remember the discussion that took place and the reasoning for it.
Thank you, Ms. Bolden. Any other last comments before we vote? Okay, so as I understand it, the motion on the table is to have a dedicated student group for the topic of school safety. Dr. Moffitt, do I have that motion right? Sure, it's no problem. It was that there be a dedicated student group for the purposes of getting student perspective on school safety. Okay, so motion and second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Wagner?
Bolton?
No.
Mr. Craig?
No.
Ms. Jones?
No.
Dr. Moffitt?
Yes.
Mr. Morosky?
No.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
No. Okay, any other assignments?
I have a question. So let me ask a question. So assignments need to be voted on. Is that right?
So assignments can be made only in a public meeting with the approval of a majority of board members.
Doesn't have to be in the form of a motion. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I think this is an area where there has been an absence of clarity in the past. And one of the things I've been trying to work on in response to that is in the last couple meetings, making sure that if there are any assignments, they're clear and that we have a majority of board members who support them. So if you, as I read the bylaws, and I've tried very hard to make sure I read this correctly, an assignment has to be made with an approval of a majority of board members in a public meeting.
President.
Okay, I'm going to clarify.
Mr. Moffitt.
I just want to clarify because when I read the bylaws, I wasn't under the impression that I knew that they had to be made public, but I wasn't under the impression that they needed to have a motion and there were assignments. So I'm going to clarify that and then bring it back because I really am a little confused on if assignments to administration need to be. Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry. You got your hand up.
Thanks, Dr. Moffitt. I think Ms. Bolden was next and then Mr. Morosky.
We have to make assignments as a board, even when we're putting on minutes or whatever from committees. It has to be a majority. However, practice has been we only ask for a vote if a consensus is not obvious. So when you have a consensus, we don't vote. Because if we start voting on everything, or anybody can make a motion at any time, we're gonna end up being this 4-3 board or 5-2 or whatever instead of a consensus board. So if there's a consensus, doesn't require a vote. If there's some confusion or people can pick up some concern, then you have to vote.
Okay.
Thanks, Ms. Bolden. Mr. Morosky.
That's all I was going to say.
Okay.
Just in a different way, yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Morosky. Any other assignments? Any announcements or kudos? Vice President Jones.
I have a kudo. You want that? That's okay? Okay. Thank you. I had the pleasure of attending the Walnut Hills High School Alumni Symphony Orchestra concert on Friday night. And I was extremely proud and extremely pleased to walk into the auditorium and hear music coming like, what do you call it, surround sound, only to learn that the choir was up in the balcony. So they were singing. So it was really nice. But I did want to give special kudos to not only the couple of alumni who I recognize by name. One is TQ Frank, who teaches in our district, and Alex Kuhn, who served on this. He plays bass, and I promised him I wouldn't boo him, and I didn't. But I wanted to give kudos to 3 individuals, students, 1 former student and 2 current students. There was a young lady who graduates this year in 23, the most beautiful soprano voice you would ever want to hear. Poised, beautiful, and sang her tail off. Her name is, I am allowed to give names. This is not health information, so I'm not violating HIPAA, but Ella Vaughn is her name. Just beautiful. And she plans to be as her mother. I actually had worked with her mother and didn't know that she sang. But anyway, her mother says she's undecided right now, but plans to be a music major. The second person was a young lady who played the mess out of a violin. She had a violin solo. Her name is Maggie Vonderschmidt. She also will graduate in 23. Again, very poised and excellent in her presentation. The third young man was a graduate of 2019, and he played in the alumni orchestra. His name is Miles Giselle, and it so happened that he played cello. And when he was done, he came down, and his parents were sitting right in front of me. So I had the opportunity to talk to him. But anyway, his story, for when he graduated, he went to LA. He now plays with the LA Orchestra, and he also teaches inner city youth how to play cello. And I just congratulated him and told him how proud we were of him and all his classmates. And it was just a wonderful concert. So I want to offer kudos. Oh, and also, I was also told that this young man also played basketball for Walnut, and that one of the games when he was still here, he actually played the national anthem on cello for the basketball game. So kudos to all 3 of those people.
Thank you, Vice President Jones. Mrs. Weinberg.
Yes, I have a couple of kudos, and I have some slides that I'm going to show. So hopefully I won't take too long. I know you guys want to leave. I'm freezing. Here on this first picture, I would like to give kudos to Superintendent Wright and her staff. Thank you so much for helping me in celebrating Mary Weinberg Day. As you can see, oh yes, the clap. What really touched me was being able to read to the students of Evanston at the school. And as you can see in this picture, this young man was just so delighted to be able to have a gold medal draped around his neck. He was just so happy. And for me, it always gives me a great pleasure, especially as a former educator, to be able to read to the kids and use that animated voice. So I just wanted to thank 3 schools. I wanted to thank Evanston, obviously elementary, Hyde Park School, and also Fairview Clifton. I wanted to thank the principals for opening their doors and allowing me to come in. And the kids were really engaged and they really enjoyed themselves. So thank you so much for that. The next slide, I got the pleasure of being a presenter at the Kroger Wellness Festival, which was held on the 24th of September down at the Banks. And Withrow High School received a big check. Do you guys see that amount? $25,000. And Dr. Webb was also one of the teachers to be one of the recipients. And it was a pleasure being on stage with Tony the Tiger. And we had a pop-up guest, Superintendent Wright. She made her way as well. And I knew that I wasn't going to do the exercises, and you helped out. So thank you so much for doing that. And she was able to experience being up there, and it just gave great pleasure from Kellogg's and also Kroger Health in terms of being able to give this award to Withrow High School and also Dr. Webb. My next slide, we dressed up and we looked very fancy as board members. I wanted to say that I got the pleasure of this Saturday evening attending the NAACP Freedom Gala. And as you can see, we have board member Vice President Jones. Then I also got a picture with President Lindy, and I heard that board member Craig was there, and sorry that we missed you. We'll have to probably take a picture here tonight and post that up. But what really made my night was being able to attend the Walnut Hills, they called it the 125th plus two. And the reason why they did that, it was their anniversary gala in which, due to COVID, they were not able to celebrate. And it was a very, very nice evening. That's the middle picture here where we have our vice mayor. And then I attended and got the chance to see Dr. Moffitt and then, of course, Principal Chambers. So I just wanted to give a shout out, and I wanted to make sure that I pronounced this name correct. But these two individuals are part of the Alumni Foundation, and I had the honor of just getting a chance to sit down and talk with them. I think the person's name, his name is Neil Bortz. And I also, of course, got the chance to talk with Debbie Hellman, which I know very well. And I always have a love and a passion for Walnut Hills because that is the school that I graduated from. So it was a great time, and I just wanted to share those pictures with you all. I think that's it.
Thank you, Board Member Weinberg.
Ooh, I think I have one more. I don't have a slide for this one, but I did tell someone that I was going to mention. I know October, we have partnered with the Greater Cincinnati Regional Food Policy Council, and it's an initiative of the Green Umbrella. And we just want to recognize that they are really teaching our students and children about celebrating food that's locally grown, and they're eating that and learning all about that. So kudos to them. They had a story on WLWT, and then also there was something in Movers and Shakers magazine. So that's it. I'm officially really done.
Thank you, Ms. Weinberg. Anything else comes up, let us know. Any other kudos? Superintendent Wright.
I just had one that I wanted to add. We have launched our first Alphabet Soup, which is our online newsletter that goes out to families. It was sent out on yesterday at 5 o'clock, so they will receive those. We were also able in the newsletter to give recognition for the focus on our local farms and the support that's happening for our schools through that process. And so, and the team also had the information on our social media site. So this is on our website, but it goes out to all families. And as of today, we had thousands of views already. So another way for us to try to make sure that we're getting the word out about the great things that are happening in CPS.
Thank you, Superintendent. Any other kudos? Last call. I will share briefly. I was also going to thank the NAACP for a wonderful event on Saturday and just offer the Jewish members of our community a Shana Tova and a Happy New Year and an easy fast on Wednesday. And with no other business before us, I declare our meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.